So, good morning, everybody. Well, okay. Just in case you were wondering, am I the first gen or the second gen? I am the first gen. My name rhymes with Park. So, the title of my mini sermon today is Godism and the Bucket. So I'm going to start out by reading a couple lines from one of Father's speeches where he talks about Godism. And he says, I declared the fundamental principle for unification more than 40 years ago. Since then, I have carried out a movement of ideas centered on Godism, both domestically and around the world. Over the years, leaders of many countries and in the philosophical world have recognized Godism as the only philosophy not only capable of uniting materialism and atheism, which are diametrical opposites, but also capable of liberating secular humanism. My patriotic compatriots, filled with passionate hope for the North-South unification, let us together establish our value systems on the basis of Godism. Okay, so what is Godism? Anybody have an idea? If someone were to ask you on the street, Jay Leno came up and said, what is Godism? What would you say?
Your life centered on God.
Your life centered on God? Okay, that's a good answer. Anybody else? So Godism is one of these terms that's part of our unification lexicon, right? We've all heard the term, and we have a vague idea. Some people kind of know what it is, but most people feel, well, it's something to do with God and ism. So I'm going to go into that just a bit. Godism seeks to implement the actual kingdom of heaven on earth. It transcends all religions, nationalities, cultures, and races. The key to Godism is that it's very universal, right? And it sounds very simple, just one word, right? Godism. I can sum it up in 2 sentences. There is a being who is the loving parent of all mankind, and 2, the purpose of life on earth is to love God and others and be loved. The end. Very simple. So imagine this scenario. If every single human being woke up one day and said, "Thank you, God, for this day of life. My purpose today is to love others, nothing else." What would that look like? Think for a minute. Imagine every single person in the world woke up with that idea. My purpose today is simply to love others. That's my only purpose. What kind of world would that be? A little better than what we have now? Probably. Is that realistic? It's a nice dream, isn't it? That we can wish that that would happen or dream about it. But is it really possible? Well, at least a couple people have done it. Jesus, did it. By the way, was he a Methodist, a Baptist, or a Presbyterian? Does anybody know?
He was Jewish.
He was Jewish? Okay. So he wasn't really Christian at all, right? So actually, he wasn't even really Jewish in the sense. He was a person who woke up every day and he had a goal to love God with all his heart, to lay down his life for his friends, and to love his enemies. That's it. Very simple. He was practicing Godism. What about true parents? They've done it, certainly. And those of us who had a lot of time to interact with Father, I think honestly can say there's really nobody in all of history who loved God more than Father. Right? Would anybody disagree with that? Not if you knew him, you wouldn't. So Godism is very simple, but how do you live it? How do you practice it every day? So I'm going to read a little story from this book. It's called Everybody Always by Bob Goff. Some of the Project Phoenix staff know that Bob Goff is one of my favorite authors. And he's a person who is trying to live a life of love. So let me just turn to... Okay, one of the problems he has, like some of us, is he has a character quality of impatience. Okay, he's a very impatient person in his daily life, right? So he's struggling with that issue. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. So I'm going to read a little bit of just part of one of his stories. While living my life this way, being impatient, has been working out great for me, I started to wonder how it was working for the people around me. So I asked them, okay, do you know what I found out? My impatience was driving them nuts. A few weeks after I asked the question, I found a beautiful kids' book that changed everything for me. It was a book about buckets, and its premise was simple. We will become in our lives what we put in our buckets. I knew I needed to fill mine with patience. I decided to put the bucket book to the test. So I went to a hardware store and I bought a metal bucket. I carried it with me everywhere for 3 weeks as an experiment. The bucket was made of galvanized aluminum and had a wire handle. I looked like a dairy farmer. I took my bucket with me in cars, on sailboats, in subways, everywhere. People on airplanes would ask if I had a bladder problem. Actually, I'd say jokingly, I do. But then I would say, I have an even bigger problem. I'm really impatient. I let them know how I use the bucket as a reminder to fill my life with patience every day. Then he gets invited to give a sermon at a large church in Texas. He says, the minister asked me to come speak at his church one Sunday. He had called me almost a year in advance and gave me the date for the Sunday service. I jumped at the chance to be with this particular minister. What I didn't realize until the weekend finally arrived was that the date he picked was Super Bowl Sunday. I don't watch much football during the season. I'm too impatient. But I love watching the Super Bowl. What I really love is being with my wife and eating nachos. The Super Bowl gives me the excuse I need to do both. I'm a pretty energetic person, so traveling and being around a lot of people works for me. What works for my wife, however, is to have me home. Because she is there, being home works pretty good for me too. So I don't think of all the reasons I'm not going to be home, I just get there. I'll fly from Atlanta to San Diego for supper and back to the East Coast the next day. I've been doing this for years. I spent over 20 years commuting from San Diego to Seattle each morning, and I would still make it home for dinner at night. Our kids were in junior high before they knew. When they figured it out, they said, "Dad, you said you work downtown." "I do," I answered. They just never asked me which city. So when I finished speaking at the last of several services, I jumped into my rental car and I bolted for the airport to get home for the last couple plays of the Super Bowl, where no doubt the Patriots were going to win anyway. I just added that. It was going to be tight like usual. When I got to the rental car return lot, there were a couple of lines with an attendant at the front of each. I chose my line and I began waiting. Nothing happened for several minutes, so I craned my neck out the window to see what was the holdup. At the front of the line, an attendant was staring into the air as if he were trying to remember the words to a Rolling Stones song. I jiggled my foot on the brake impatiently. I tapped my fingers on the dashboard. After 5 minutes, I let out an audible, exasperated, really? Into my empty car. All the while, the line next to me was moving along just fine. I was more than a little peeved. I can't deny, as the cold realization sunk in, I had got that guy. You know the one I'm talking about. The only gears he seemed to have were slow, stop, and reverse. I sat in my rental car, fingers still drumming on the steering wheel, waiting for him to gain consciousness. The car in front of me started to inch forward, but then it happened again. Entire seasons went by while I waited. I inched forward again. I was at the height of my frustration when I noticed my bucket in the passenger seat. I had completely forgotten about it. Fill it with patience, I said to myself over and over. Fill it with patience. Finally, the attendant lumbered over to me. I've seen glaciers move faster. He opened the door and slowly asked, "How was your rental car experience?" In the old days, I just would have clocked him with my bucket or made a wise crack to let him know what a lousy job he was doing. Now he had made me miss my flight. Something different was going on inside me, though. For 25 minutes, I had done my best to fill my bucket with patience. This time, instead of making the snarky remark that easily came to mind, I said to the guy as I got out of my car, "I had a great time. The car was awesome. You're awesome. Airplanes are awesome. Life is awesome. I hope you have a great day." I didn't even recognize myself. It was like a ventriloquist had his hands up my shirt and was making my mouth move and was saying things for me. This certainly didn't sound like the old Bob talking. And you know what? It was a bucket filled with patience doing the talking. I had missed my plane by a lot. I got out of the car with my bucket and started walking to the terminal to book a new flight. I had walked halfway across the parking lot when the rental car guy came running up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. A little winded, he said to me, "Hey, I just want you to know," he paused to catch his breath, that was a great sermon you gave in church." You were there, I thought, as I held back a gasp. Oh man, if he only knew what was going on in my head while I was sitting in line before I remembered my bucket in the passenger seat. We can pretend to have all the game we want to up on stage, in the pulpit and on the field, at work or in our faith community. But it's how we engage with the rental car attendant or the grocery bagger or the bank teller or the person who puts on the car tires that lets everybody know where we really are with God. I still get it wrong more than I get it right, but I was so grateful that I had filled my bucket with the right stuff that day. All the words and emotions that otherwise would have spewed out of me would have shattered this guy and shown me for the impatient, selfish guy I'm still trying to put on the bus. People will figure out what we really believe by seeing what we actually do. Everybody has a plan, but God is looking for people who know their purpose. As often as I try to make it look otherwise, most of the time I make everything about me. I make it about my schedule and my timing, how I'm feeling, and how big of a hurry I'm in. Kind of like Paul in the Bible, I talk a good game, but I find myself doing exactly what I said I wouldn't do and not doing what I said I would do. While unloading on the rental guy the way I wanted to at first might have worked for me for a few moments as I let off some steam, the conversation wouldn't have worked for him. Because I'd been filling my bucket with patience, I'm sure I had the conversation I should have had with a rental car guy that day. As a result, I let loose a lot of grace into the world. It's this simple and that difficult. The guy who's up in front at church needs to be the same guy in the back of the rental car line. If you can't do that, either stop driving or get off the stage. Bringing those two different people together is going to take a whole lifetime and a pretty big bucket. So, in conclusion, the point of the story is not that you should go out today and buy a bucket and walk around with the bucket, but what is important is how we treat each other. And not just while we're in church, but every day of our lives. Practicing Godism is not about knowing some complicated ideology, it's about loving others. And start with your own family and community. Most of you are already well along the journey to being a loving person. If not, start today. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So, today I wanted to talk about 4 misconceptions that I had about love. And I wanted to start with what love is. And at least in American English, we use love a lot as a word. We say, I love these chandeliers. They're so elegant. I love being here in Boston because this community has been so welcoming. I love being on the Project Phoenix staff. You guys are my best friends right now. But those, saying love in those different contexts, it means more of, I really enjoy this, I really appreciate this, I really like this. And in those senses, love is kind of a feeling. It's a feeling that we have. But actually, what I've been discovering is love is, at least in the way that True Father talks about it, love is an action. And it may be inspired by a feeling or an emotion that we have, but true love is doing something for others. And I actually, I want to talk about something that came up at the Project Phoenix event, and it's this idea of mind-body unity. And that in the original divine principle, written in Korean with Chinese characters, that the character for mind is perhaps better translated as heart. The character is, in Japanese, it's kokoro, and it's also the first character in 심정, the word for heart in Korean. And so it may seem like a mistranslation, because heart and mind are 2 completely different ideas in English, but actually it's, I think it's more that mind has shifted in our language right now. And when most people say mind in English, it has something to do with your thoughts. And it's this kind of rational, intellectual thing. But actually, 50 or 100 years ago, when people were talking about mind, they were thinking about the essence of your being. Like, the mind is something that generates your will or your purpose. And it's who you are. And it's not just what's going on up here, but it's who you are. And actually, the Korean word maum, or mind, it has, depending on the context, it can be mind, it can also be heart or soul or essence or purpose. And so really, mind-body unity is talking about So there's your body, which exists in this world, but there's also who you are, your purpose, your essence, your soul. And so we need to unite who we are with what we are in this world. And I want to suggest that the motivation for love, actually, that comes out of who we are. And it's not just an emotion caused by chemicals in the brain, and it's not just a feeling that we have in our body, but it's actually something that comes from deep within us. And to really love is to act. And in unificationism, we often talk about a give and take action. And it could be easy to put give and take action, or to put love in terms of give and take action. But this is actually the second misconception that I had, is that love is, or rather true love, true unconditional love is not dependent on give and take action, but it's actually just giving. And that by giving, there will probably be something returned, but that in true love, true love is not dependent on what's returned. I had an experience a couple months ago where I was trying to communicate with a friend and just be loving to them, and they weren't responding, and this was really confusing to me, and I wanted a response, and then all of a sudden God told me, God asked me, do you really love this person? And I said, yeah, of course I do. Well, what if they don't respond to you, like ever? Will you keep communicating with them? And I had to really think about that, like, wow, okay. I wasn't thinking like that. I wasn't thinking about what, because I wanted something. I wanted a response from them. And then God asked me, what if to really love this person, you have to stop communicating with them? And that's the most loving thing you can do for them. And you may never know what that does for them. And I had to decide, okay, if this is the most loving thing I can do, do I really love my friend? And so love is an action, and True Father likes to talk about. He likes to use mothers as an example of unconditional love. As a love that just gives and forgets that it is given. But yeah, love is an action. And it may be inspired by an emotion, but love is an action. The third misconception I had about love is how to experience it. And growing up, I tried to look the best that I could. I didn't want to cause problems in my family, so I would try to do the best that I could in school, but if I didn't, I would cover it up and then try to fix it. I was homeschooled, so it's a little easier for me. Or when I was in the Boy Scouts, if I would start to if things would not go according to plan, instead of asking for help, I would just be like, all right, these are all the things that I have to do to fix this situation so that everything goes well, and then people look at me and think, oh, wow, he's such a capable person. But even when people would tell me how well I was doing, like, wow, you're such a great senior patrol leader, or wow, your grades are so good, I would know how I wasn't performing and all the mistakes that I was making. And so I would think, well, you don't actually know the truth. And so I would, inside, reject all the praise and love I would receive from others. And I would just tell myself, I don't deserve this. And so this is the third misconception about love. To really be loved requires honesty, and it requires vulnerability. And it's not in the sense of telling all of our secrets to the world, but for those that we're close to, for our friends, our parents, our children, if we really want to be loved and accepted in our closest relationships, that requires honesty and vulnerability, which is so hard. It's so hard. But otherwise, how can we ever have the assurance that we actually are loved for everything? Because anyone can love someone who does well, right? Like, we can appreciate success, we can appreciate people who speak well on stage, we can appreciate people who are beautiful. But what about on their off days? If we never see an off day, then how can we have the opportunity to appreciate them for all that they are and not just what they show us? So that's the third misconception. And finally, the fourth is, actually, it's something that I really struggled a lot with in our movement, and it's the idea of indemnity. And that for a long time, I thought indemnity, I had to pay indemnity for God to love me, to be lovable by God. And, I knew all of my sins growing up. I knew I wasn't a perfect second gen. And so I just felt the weight of God coming onto me and judging me. And I couldn't come before God because we're supposed to restore humankind, right? We're supposed to fulfill the providence. We're supposed to comfort God's heart. And I don't want to weigh God down. I want to comfort him. So actually, I was doing my third misconception. I was hiding myself. I was keeping things from God. And so I believed that God can't love every part of me. Also, indemnity is really scary. I didn't want to pay indemnity. It's like a lot of work. So it's easier. It was easier for me growing up to not pay indemnity and to be unlovable in the eyes of God. And it wasn't until I went to college and I joined a Christian student group that I encountered a different side of God. And so my friends in this group, they had experienced a transformation of grace, salvation of grace from Christ. And they were just so unconditionally loving. And they accepted me. They wanted to create a place for me. And the way they talked about God was just as a divine being who loves unconditionally, who forgives absolutely, and who has a place for everyone. And this was so confusing for me because I believed in the principle. I thought the principle was correct. But I felt I felt that this was how God had to be. And I didn't know how to reconcile the truth that I had learned growing up with this new idea of God. And I thought I had to choose. I thought I had to choose between what I thought was true and what I felt was good and what I felt was loving. And ultimately, I chose not to convert to Christianity, which was really hard because I was choosing what I thought was true, but also it felt really crappy. And it wasn't until a couple years ago that I actually realized that what was holding me back is this idea of indemnity as payment for love. Because that's not love, right? Father doesn't talk about love like that you have to give something in order to receive love. And I realized that actually indemnity is for restoration. Indemnity has nothing to do with forgiveness. That God forgives us absolutely. But that actually indemnity is about returning to our original place. And that if I feel more love as I get restored, it's because I'm getting closer to God, and it's easier for me to receive the love that God is always sending to me. Like the love that God sends to me is constant and it doesn't change. And if I feel it changing, it's because I'm changing. Yeah, the God that your Father talks about, and the God that my Christian friends experience, they're the same. And God loves absolutely and unconditionally and harder than we can ever imagine. So love is not just a feeling, it's an action. Unconditional love gives, and it's not dependent on receiving. To really be loved, we have to share our whole selves. And indemnity is about restoration, not forgiveness. We are loved absolutely and unconditionally by God. Thank you. Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Parent, thanks for always being there for us. Even when I don't always notice you and I don't always make time for you. Thank you for never giving up on me, and for always believing in me, and for believing in our movement. Thank you for this thing you've created called Project Phoenix, for inspiring the founders to clash and have an experience of love and understanding. And I really see that through things like Project Phoenix, that you still believe in in the American movement, and that you see all of our potential, no matter where we are or what we're doing, and you just want us to succeed. And I just hope we can succeed in whatever it is we're doing. And that we can just receive your love as it is. And that as we receive it, we can share it with others. I report this in the name of Sunder and Yumi, a blessed central couple. Adieu.